As is often the case in history, you have crucially important strategic developments occurring at moments where you have potential tragedy looming. We're at such a moment right now in which we have an invasion, in a sense, of the British and British policies. But what's the problem? What are we facing? Why is this the case? Well, the danger of World War III came from the Biden-Blinken policies. The better way of putting it is from the Anglo-American oligarchy commitment to a unipolar order. It was putting us on the brink of World War III and possibly nuclear war. And for what reason? To weaken Russia. From 1991 forward, you had an effort to break up Russia, which was a continuation in a sense of the anti-Soviet policy of many years, and even before that, the anti-Russian policies that came out of the British Empire. After the peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Union, you had a situation where Russia wanted partnership, and the West promised partnership to Russia. But there were two big lies that stood in the way. The first was that the West promised no eastward expansion of NATO. But this was quickly proven to be false, as there was an intention to surround Russia with hostile states armed with weapons tied to NATO. Secondly, that in order to bring Russia to a modern economic policy, it was necessary to have a shock therapy. But this was an excuse to loot Russia. It did not create a modern free market economy. Instead, it created an oligarchy tied to the British and Western banks that looted the country and put it on the verge of destruction. Now, essentially, this is the policy of British geopolitics. Good for the City of London and its allies, bad for everyone else. And this led to such things as the 2014 Maidan coup in Ukraine, which was funded by a gaggle of operations tied to non-governmental organizations, such as the Soros Open Society Fund, as well as the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and other such operations. And essentially, the whole point of the Maidan coup in 2014 was to prepare Ukraine for war against Russia. And it led to an increasing tension between Russia and the West, which led to the 2022 special military operation launched by Putin, which gave an excuse to cut off all relations with Russia, to launch sanctions against Russia. But those sanctions had a backfire effect on the European economies, on top of which there were huge expenditures for war. There was some resistance from parties in Europe and individuals, but for the most part, the persistent lies against Russia dominated. The idea that Russia was involved in election meddling, whether it was Brexit or Russiagate. Such events as the Skripal affair, where the Russians were accused of using chemical weapons to attack their own citizens, which have turned out to be a hoax. The idea that Putin is a dictator who said he wants to restore the Soviet Empire, which of course is not true. It reminds me of what LaRouche used to say: if your dog is pregnant, blame Putin. Now, what changed the situation was the election, the second time around, of Donald Trump in 2025. He learned something from the first time. If you want to pursue peace, you have to take on the enemies of peace. And we see that occurring now with the broadside attacks against the intelligence community, the appointment of Tulsi Gabbard, of Patel as FBI director, an opportunity to clean up the deep state swamp. Now, more importantly, what Trump said is he wants to reopen the dialogue with Russia and end the war. And for that purpose, you had this meeting in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, with a follow-up meeting coming up, and soon perhaps a summit between Trump and Putin. What's the response from Europe? Panic. This is the worst thing that could happen. We're headed toward war. Now, I can tell you, you probably noticed I wasn't here the last couple of days. I was on a trip outside of the control of British and German media bubble. What I found is people who were asking the question, what the hell's wrong with these European leaders? Why do they want war? Why won't they go with Trump? It was refreshing, but also startling to find myself among people who actually can think through the problems, unlike most people who live in the Western bubble, which is controlled by the military-industrial financial complex. Now, what's the whole basis of the panic in Europe? Well, they have embraced the war. They demand that the war in Ukraine against Russia continues. And what this means is that you have a British, U.S. intelligence and corporate cartel which controls the narrative. And these control the governments as well, the corporate cartels, the military-industrial financial complex, control the governments and leading parties to pursue war. Now, what we've seen as a counter to Trump's peace offensive is a parade of European leaders, first to Kiev early this week, to pledge their continued support to Zelensky. And secondly, a parade now to Washington, D.C. Donald Tusk from Poland was there. Trump gave him a few minutes to talk. Macron was there. They had an extended discussion where Macron made the case for continuing the war. Today, British Prime Minister Starmer is going to arrive, and he's going to try to convince Trump that you have to stick by Ukraine and keep the war going. Now, Starmer is there specifically to save the special relationship, the idea that the Brits can continue to steer the United States into a course of British geopolitical warfare for the defense of the City of London and its related military-industrial financial complex companies. And then Zelensky comes on Friday. Is he going to resign? Is he going to hand over these strategic metals of Ukraine to Trump? Well, we'll see. There's been an ongoing fight there, especially when Trump made the correct statement that Zelensky is a dictator. He's no longer the official president. His term is over. He canceled elections. Why should he be the one who's making the decisions for his country when his decisions have been so bad for his countrymen? Then you have the intervention of Friedrich Merz, who is the newly elected Chancellor of Germany, with 28% of the vote. He's acting as though he had a landslide. He's an arrogant establishment figure. But what Merz called for the other day was Europe must have independence from the United States. Interesting, huh? It's an acknowledgement that Europe is marching under a U.S. war policy. Now, the message coming to Trump from all the European leaders is keep the war going. We don't trust Putin. We have to keep fighting. We have to have the military build up. And Trump, on the other side, is saying he wants to have peace. He's open to arms reductions. He's open to restoring the nuclear agreements with Russia. And furthermore, he's looking at the possibility of trade and economic cooperation with Russia, which could mean an opening from the United States to the global south. Europe, on the other hand, is talking about a war buildup and funding it with funny money and austerity. So the question is, how can they stop Trump? What is their ultimate plan? Now, let me just give you the report from what the City of London is saying. From the Financial Times, Martin Wolf, quote, "The U.S. is now the enemy of the West," unquote. Interesting, huh? And then The Economist basically saying that we're facing a collapsing transatlantic alliance. Stunned European leaders are beginning a diplomatic offensive to salvage it. Now let me tell you what Helga Zepp LaRouche had to say about this, because what we're basically doing is calling upon you to join the mobilization to stop this British attempt to destroy U.S. policy. Essentially to say, the British are coming, the British are coming. A famous statement in history. What Helga Zepp LaRouche said in summarizing the situation is, quote, "I have the feeling that the European allies have lost connection to reality. They cannot adjust to the changing strategic situation. When someone has lost all touch with reality, as the European leaders have, you normally call them insane." Now, I'm attaching the discussion, the dialogue I had with Helga yesterday in the description section. There's a link to it. Listen to it. Think about what she's saying in terms of how you could change it, how Trump is moving to change it. Not in all questions doing the right thing, but the strategy is right. Talk to Russia, have a dialogue, and move toward a new strategic and development architecture. So listen to what Helga had to say. And then this Friday, as every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we'll have another Zoom call of the International Peace Coalition. Organize people to come with you to listen to it, to join it. This is where the fight is being waged on the right issues in the right way. Restoring the idea of the independence of the anti-colonial American Revolution against the efforts of the pathetic European leaders who are going to Trump saying, please keep the war going. The question is, will the European hypocrites end up winning, or will we? And that's up to you to determine. Tomorrow is Friday. I'll take your questions and comments. Send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com.